whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Now, haere ake nei, the choice that isn't really a choice, petrol in the tank or food in the belly, and the switch to actual horsepower to avoid pain at the pump. So is Aotearoa facing a cost of living crisis or not? We ask MPs and reveal which Labour one is out of step with the Prime Minister. More human remains are found inside the Pike River mine as the drilling investigation comes officially to an end. Isolation for COVID cases is cut to help keep the country running as pressure goes on transport and food supplies. 22,454 new community cases today. The COVID response minister is live. And the battle over a pretty pedestrian crossing goes to court. Catch us on Sky, Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie ko Evie Ashton tēnei. Confidence is growing that the Omicron outbreak has peaked in Auckland. The region's proportion of daily cases has dropped from 61% to 54% over the past week. Here's our political reporter Annika Smith.
8,500 of the 22,500 new community cases reported today are in Auckland. The Ministry of Health says while that number is still high, daily case numbers in Tāmaki Makaurau have levelled off over the past week. It expects to know in the next few days if this signals the outbreak there has peaked. In the country as a whole, the number of people in hospital with the virus has dipped from 756 yesterday to 742 today. 4 more people have died with COVID, bringing the death toll to 69.
Businesses are welcoming the news that people can return to work sooner after catching COVID. From Saturday, people who test positive for the virus and those they live with will have to isolate for 7 days, down from 10. Alan McDonald of the Employers and Manufacturers Association says it will help firms struggling with staff shortages.
Being able to get people back to work quicker will help keep up. I mean, we've seen some of our members with 50% absentee rates, and the predictions was 12, so 20, 30, 50 are the sort of numbers we're hearing. And it's causing all sorts of random closures.
Business New Zealand also says the move makes sense. A shipment of 250,000 Novavax COVID vaccine doses has arrived in the country, and a limited number of vaccination centres will be offering them from next week. However, the unvaccinated Mayor of Thames Coromandel, Sandra Gowdy, who has previously said she was waiting for Novavax, now says she won't have it.
I said I would consider the Novavax, but having considered that for what has it been, nearly a year, is it? So, no thanks.
Sandra Gowdy is not allowed into council buildings as a vaccine pass is required for entry, so she's chairing meetings remotely. Further evidence of human remains has been found in the Pike River mine. Images captured by cameras down a re-drilled borehole show 2 sets of remains, making 8 in all. Samantha G reports.
The latest images were taken in an area where men are believed to have been working at the time of the first explosion in November 2010. The police have been gathering borehole footage that may help them determine if there's criminal culpability for the disaster. Detective Superintendent Peter Reid says the investigation has given them valuable information about the underground activity that led to the first explosion. The criminal investigation continues, with many families remaining hopeful charges will be laid.
The Prime Minister says New Zealand will not be immune to rising energy and fuel prices as a result of the Ukraine crisis. The US has confirmed a complete ban on Russian oil, gas and coal imports, and oil prices are already surging. Jacinda Ardern says all the sanctions against Russia are necessary, but there will be a knock-on effect.
We already, globally, we're in a place where economic recovery from COVID, supply constraints, and now the war means that we have a perfect storm that everyone is experiencing, and New Zealand is not alone in that.
Jacinda Ardern says the government will continue to support low and medium income households to help ease the pressure. And the government will tomorrow confirm its plans for RNZ, TVNZ and the creation of a new public media entity. The two organisations are to be disestablished and reformed as one, with a public service mandate by the middle of next year. It's understood the new entity will be able to raise some revenue through commercial operations, but commercial-free aspects, particularly for RNZ, will be protected. To sport, and key All Whites Chris Wood and Libby Kakache will play in this month's Oceania World Cup qualifiers in Qatar. The pair have been included in a 30-strong squad but will be with the side for only part of the tournament as the opening games fall outside the FIFA international window. Sarpreet Singh was unavailable because of injury, while Wellington Phoenix players Ben Old and Ben Wayne make the senior side for the first time. New Zealand's first game is against Papua New Guinea on Sunday week. Meanwhile, the Phoenix hope to maintain a 7-match unbeaten run in the A-League when they play Newcastle tonight. In Champions League football, Liverpool and Bayern Munich have reached the quarterfinals. All Blacks first five Beauden Barrett will make his first start of the Super Rugby season for the Blues against the Highlanders on Friday night. However, the Blues will be without Roger Tuivasa-Sheck for several weeks as he suffered a shoulder injury in the win over the Chiefs. An upset is on the cards at the Women's Cricket World Cup today. One of the tournament favourites, England, are currently struggling against the West Indies in their pool match in Dunedin. Set 226 to win, England a short time ago were 115 for 5 after 28 overs. And former world tennis number one Andy Murray has pledged to donate his prize money earnings for the rest of the year to help children affected by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That's the news.
The horrors of war.
There's been some absolutely dreadful videos of people trying to escape. You know, old women, people in wheelchairs, people carrying babies, and they're being fired on.
The tactics of war.
We're banning all imports of Russian oil and gas, and the American people will deal another powerful blow to Putin's war machine.
And living next door to an oligarch.
I'm a real basic person. People ask me where I live, I say, oh yeah, my neighbour's a Russian billionaire.
Full coverage of the Ukraine conflict. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mainly fine, isolated showers, especially north of Orewa and about Coromandel Peninsula. For the remainder of the Ika a Maui, the North Island, mostly fine. Low cloud for Wellington tomorrow morning. Isolated showers about some central ranges until tonight. Looking to Te Waipoinamu, Nelson, Buller and Westland mainly fine. Cloudy periods tomorrow with occasional showers south of the glaciers. Fiordland, occasional rain clearing by this evening, but showers tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago, Central Otago and Dunedin. Mainly fine today. Isolated afternoon showers inland. Low cloud and patchy drizzle developing tonight. Drizzle is clearing tomorrow morning and low cloud is retreating to the coast until the evening. For Clutha and Southland, cloudy periods today with light rain about Rakiura, Stewart Island, clearing this evening. Areas of low cloud tomorrow morning, otherwise fine. And for Re Kohu, the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The drive to school or lunch when the kids get there, filling the car or feeding the whānau, bills or ballooning debt. Families across Aotearoa are struggling to make ends meet as the cost of living rises and are being made to make the tough calls over the basics. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person filed this report from Te Tai Tokerau.
No mai ki Kaikohi, the hub of the north, population 4,400. A lovely place with lots happening, but not a lot in the way of employment options. More than half of the town earns less than $50,000 a year, and the cost of living here?
It's not great, eh?
Incredibly hard. It's very tough. It's horrible.
Shocking.
From grocery bills to filling the car, and then there's the rising rents, families here are feeling the pinch. Call it a crunch, a crisis, or just plain old crazy. Many are struggling to make ends meet, like Jeanette.
Well, my partner's had to stop work because he was driving, the distance was too far for the amount of petrol that he was putting into it. So it was better off just being at home because the cost was too much.
Having worked in forestry, there was no bus, e-bike or electric vehicle option available. A group of workers was carpooling to get to the remote bay they worked in, but it still didn't add up.
For my partner to travel to work each week, it was costing at least $200 out of our single income for him just to get to work and home each day, each week, where that was taken away from our food, which food costs were rising as well, so we had to really budget and choose what was necessary, and everything else would have to go.
Now the family of 4 is relying on the benefit.
Covers our main costs, which is grateful, but it won't get us anywhere in the future. It will just keep us where we are.
She says they did think about an e-vehicle, but making the switch right now is beyond their budget.
To sell off one car to get another car, it doesn't work out right now. Yep, the money.
So it's back to the petrol station, where today Kelly Black is filling up containers to take home.
Well, just for those two, probably 150, just for the four-wheeler at home.
Petrol is $3.07 a litre, and on the other side of the pump, Tainui is over it.
It takes like $20 to get to, just to town now, 20 to 30, just to get to town. So, and when you're trying to run your business, it's really expensive. You have to add that to your costs, which drives your prices up higher as a small business, so it's getting real hard.
Tainui runs a property maintenance company focused on roofing and says an e-vehicle isn't an option for them.
I don't even think we could afford to purchase one of those vehicles, let alone. And up here we need our 4x4s. If we're rolling around with a battery-powered car, it will just not work. And the dusties are real bad, so yeah. It's horrible. Tell Jacinda it's horrible and we need her to put it down ASAP.
Not far from the petrol station, Timmy is selling sausages. He's busy with families and motorists pulling over for a bite. He's earning a bit of extra cash to prop up his pension and says while he gets by thanks to careful planning, he says others doing it tough.
Well, I try and give sausages away, right? Because people can't even afford a $2 sausage. And even though bread's gone up, it used to be $1, it's gone up to $1.40. Right, and the sausages have gone up. I know there's a lot of people around Kaikohe who struggle, so if they haven't got the $2, well, I just give it to them, and it's, I feel for those ones with big families.
Timmy only comes into town a few days a week to save on petrol, but isn't sure an e-bike would work for him.
E-bikes, I haven't seen an e-bike here. Honestly, I wouldn't know what an e-bike was. You can see them in Auckland, but I don't have TV, so I don't go there.
But lo and behold, as Timmy's frying his onions, up pulls Tipini Mokaraka, riding the first e-bike Timmy's ever seen.
I can get to Whangarei, and yeah, sure, it takes me all day, but I don't spend anything on petrol. It's what's the point? And then you've got road taxes and all the other bollocks that goes with it. It's get on an e-bike. It's just less problems.
People here are even resorting to taking the horse to town rather than getting behind the wheel.
And that's why we had to put certain gates on our bike trail, because guys in the villages were coming into town on their horses. So we had to put pinch bars up and all that to sort of prevent it.
There are a couple of bus services that operate on Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays in Kaikohe, but commuter options here are few and far between. So the pain at the pump won't be easing anytime soon.
A number of big-name Western brands have added to the Kremlin's global isolation over its invasion of Ukraine. McDonald's and Starbucks will temporarily close stores in Russia, while Pepsi and Coca-Cola are suspending business in the country. Meanwhile, civilians have fled the besieged city of Sumy in the first successful humanitarian corridor. But Ukraine has accused Russian forces of shelling another evacuation route from Mariupol in the south. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has renewed calls for more sanctions and no-fly zones, something the West has rejected for fears of escalating the conflict. Anei te kai reporter Andrew McRae.
Wearing military fatigues, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made an historic virtual speech to the UK House of Commons. He vowed his country will fight against Russia till the end.
We do not want to lose what we have, what is ours, our country, Ukraine. Just the same way as you once didn't want to lose your country when Nazis started to fight your country.
Ukraine is blaming Russian forces for another failed attempt to evacuate civilians from the besieged southern city of Mariupol. President Zelensky says Russian missile strikes have targeted civilians.
Over 50 children have been killed. These are the children that could have lived, but these people have taken them away from us.
This child, like everyone in the city of Irpin, is distraught about leaving, but desperate to escape.
We lost our life, our safety. We cannot plan any future because we don't know what will be tomorrow.
I left all my life there, and I really, really hope to come back there. I want to come back home one day.
As war in Ukraine intensifies, more and more people seek every chance to flee. NATO's Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg highlighted what was now Europe's fastest-growing refugee crisis since the Second World War.
There are very credible reports of civilians coming under fire as they try to evacuate. We need real humanitarian corridors that are fully respected.
Meanwhile, Ukrainians near the capital Kiev prepare for a renewed Russian attack.
We're here to destroy the enemy brigades, he said, the occupiers who've come to our country and are heading our way.
Ukraine's military says the pace of the Russian offensive has slowed in the past 24 hours. It's accused Russia of mainly targeting civilian infrastructure with missiles and bomb strikes, while the Russian army continue to suffer significant losses. US Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby says the Russian military was becoming frustrated and relying on long-range firing.
This is bombardment, missile strikes, long-range artillery into city centres that they aren't in yet. And of course that has been leading to, as you would expect it would, when you're relying more on long-range fires, you're gonna cause more damage and you're gonna kill more people and injure more people.
In response to more and more Western countries pulling out of Russia, a senior member of the country's ruling party has proposed nationalising foreign-owned factories that have shut down operations in the country.
It is 16 minutes past 5. Isolation times for COVID cases has been cut from 10 days to 7. It's to help keep the wheels turning around the country as more people with the virus and their household contacts are stuck at home and pressure goes on transport and food supplies. Household contacts will need to return a negative RAT test at day 3 and 7 of isolation before heading back into the outside world. And the change hits at 11:59pm on Friday. Ko taku manuhiri Naianea, Chris Hipkins, the COVID response minister, joins us now. Kia ora, Minister.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Was this a decision based on science or pragmatism?
Combination of both, actually. We've seen increasing evidence from around the world that most infection is picked up within that first 7-day period. There is a slight increase in risk, and the reason we've taken that is the latter part of your question, which is it's the pragmatic decision, because whilst there would be a marginal public health benefit to keeping people in isolation for 10 days, actually that's more than outweighed by the cost of that.
So a couple of things in that, Minister. How many positive cases were you told you'd miss by making this change? What percentage?
Well, if you look at the evidence from around the world, it varies significantly, and it varies based on a whole range of factors, including vaccination rates and so on, but it could be anything from 5% to up to 20%, but more likely it's at the lower end of that spectrum.
Okay, so you say, in essence, the risk is worth the gains. So without doing this, how long was it going to be before aspects of the country were going to grind to a halt or shut down?
Well, we already know that we hear the reports of this daily, that we've got some supply chains, including our food supply chain, which is pretty critical, under an enormous amount of pressure. So a lot of people stood down from those roles at the moment. And so, we do need to get people back to work when it's safe to. And the advice that we've had from our public health officials that it is safe to go. In the current context, it is safe to go to a 7-day isolation period.
Were we at the point where you felt that those strain on supply chains was intolerable?
I think we were starting to get to that point, maybe not across the board, but certainly in some areas there was evidence to suggest that, supply chains were under enormous pressure.
Okay, so reinfection, let's talk about that in the merry-go-round. So if you're in a household, what happens to people who might get reinfected in terms of isolation times?
Okay, so this is important. So if you're in a household with someone who gets infected, you need to isolate for 7 days. If someone else in your household gets infected during that time, the clock doesn't restart, so you're able to leave again after 7 days. Now, in terms of reinfection, if someone's had COVID-19, for the next 90 days, if somebody in their household gets infected, they don't have to isolate. After that 90-day period, then obviously the clock restarts again. But the evidence of reinfection from somebody who's had COVID-19 within 90 days, there's very few cases of that.
To be clear, the most time anyone will spend in isolation with COVID or as a household contact will be 7 days from Friday. Is that right?
No, it could be slightly more. So if you've got a household contact who is a COVID positive case, and you get COVID on say day 3 or day 4, your 7 day period starts from the day you get your positive test. But if you're a household contact and you don't test positive, at the end of the 7 day period after the first case in the household got their positive result, then you're free to leave again.
Do you think people are going to be more honest about and upload their results as a consequence of this change?
Look, I think we're seeing a high number of uploads every day at the moment. Yes, you can never guarantee that there aren't people at the margins who are not doing the right thing, but actually most Kiwis are doing the right thing.
I want to talk about schools because we've got schools doing sort of various combinations of in-class learning and remote learning and then kids teaching themselves via online materials. What consideration have you given to actually designating set days across the board for at-home learning so that parents, for example, who have kids at different schools can know that this is a day where all the kids are at home, this is the day when the kids are at school?
Yeah, that's difficult because, of course, the COVID-19 is affecting different communities differently now. And so we haven't set, universal across-the-board rules for how schools should operate. We are allowing schools to adapt to the needs of their communities. It is more challenging for teachers to be supporting kids to learn at home at the same time as they're supporting other kids in the classroom. But I think schools are managing that very well from what we're seeing so far.
Doing that, though, would help them with the cost of living too, Minister, and keep cars off the road. They wouldn't be using as much petrol ferrying children around, and there wouldn't be as much traffic on the roads. It would have a win-win.
Oh, look, ultimately, if schools within a particular community want to coordinate with each other around their responses, I'd absolutely encourage them to do that.
Cricket World Cup, they've had a rise in their crowd capacity, right, from 10% to 20%. Why not do that for all other sports? Rugby's hurting.
Ultimately, they've had to demonstrate how they will manage the risks, or how they'll manage to keep sort of the individual group sizes within the rules. I think that they've done a very thorough job. They've worked through that carefully. Are there lessons to learn and where they for how that could be applied in other settings around sports? Yes, I think there are, and so we can look at that.
When do you reckon you'll make a decision on upping crowd capacities for sports?
Look, we're heading into a peak right now, but as we start to come down the other side of that peak, as we've said, we'll be looking at all sorts of options, which at the moment, we're just cautious about.
So how far off you reckon? 4 weeks, less?
Well, unfortunately, no one can tell me at this point with any certainty when the peak is going to subside and when we're going to start coming down the other side from it. Everyone has their reckons about that, but ultimately we're dealing with a virus and it doesn't provide us a roadmap of what's going to happen next.
Suggestion is Auckland has peaked, so is there a possibility we could go from a red traffic light to something else soon?
Look, all sorts of things are possible. In terms of what's likely, it's a bit too early to tell at this point.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Chris Hipkins, who is the COVID-19 Response Minister. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mo te hōtaka nei. Let us know what you think about the price, the cost of living in New Zealand. Groceries, petrol, all the rest of it. You heard there from the far north, some people are having to make decisions about petrol in the tank or food on the table. What's the situation at your house? Pātui mai, text me 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Would you call it a crisis? And also let us know what you think about cutting the isolation period for COVID cases from 10 days to 7. The remains of 8 Pike River miners have now been found as a borehole drilling investigation into the 2010 explosion comes to an end. The criminal investigation into the mining disaster, which claimed the lives of 29 men, continues, with many families hopeful enough evidence has been gathered to lay charges. Samantha G has the details.
While further images of 2 more sets of human remains in the Pike River mine come as no surprise, many families are hoping it will go some way toward what is needed for a prosecution. The families were notified of the final images yesterday, obtained through the re-drilling of a borehole in a roadway where 3 men were working when the mine exploded. Anna Osborne, who chairs the Family Reference Group, says the findings were not unexpected, but it had been a long journey to get to this point.
I take comfort in the fact that, where the police have found bodies, that there's not great clusters of men. So, they obviously dropped where they fell when the explosion happened. So it is a comfort. I'm looking at it myself as a comfort, knowing that they didn't suffer for very long at all after the first explosion. If not instantaneously, they died.
Her husband, Milton, was killed in the disaster, and she says the police efforts in the investigation to drill boreholes and gather footage from inside the mine are reassuring.
I'm hoping that enough evidence comes about so that, I'd like to see Peter Whittle plus 3 or 4 other people. I'd like to see them in a court of law and eyeballing the families in court so, we can actually see them and they have to explain to us what the hell happened, why didn't they stop it.
Rowdy Durbridge, who was working at Pike at the time of the explosion and whose son Daniel Herc is among the 29 men who died, says it's never too late for justice.
It's comforting to know that going on the imagery that they weren't running around in fear and, to me it appears it was quick.
But each new finding and milestone is somewhat of a recurring nightmare.
The last 5 years seems to have been good in the way that the police are pursuing accountability and actually looking right into it in order to get some form of prosecution, which is great. Before that, all they want to do is shut the lid and forget it.
Detective Superintendent Peter Reid says the discoveries are significant, but left many questions experts would be seeking to answer.
The search for answers over the last 11 years has been a long and painful journey for the families of the 29 men lost at the mine. While the discovery of these 8 sets of remains is significant, I'm very aware that it still leaves many unanswered questions for the men's loved ones, and my thoughts with all of the families today.
He says the investigation is a complicated piece of work, but police are working hard for the victims and their families.
We've still got a lot of work to do with our experts. We've got 2 lots of expert groups, and we've still got a number of interviews that we want to undertake to inform us even more of what was going on that particular day, now that we've got really good images and footage from the boreholes.
He would not put a time frame on the criminal investigation, but expected it would take months rather than years.
It's 26 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Wellington Airport wants to abort the landing of a pedestrian crossing and traffic lights on a nearby road. But local cycling and pedestrian advocates say their safety shouldn't be up for debate. Our reporter Somyum Medi Party and cameraman Angus Drever have the story.
The crossing is the latest plan by Let's Get Wellington Moving, which they say makes State Highway 1 leading to the airport safer to cross. It's earmarked to go near the ASB Sports Centre on Cobham Drive. Cycling Action Network's Patrick Morgan supports the crossing and says he's disappointed the airport's seeking a judicial review to have it stopped. He says people's safety should be non-negotiable.
It's clear from the consultation on this that a lot of people don't like the idea of a crossing. I don't think safety should be subject to a referendum, and I think it's good that the expert advice was taken on this matter rather than treating it like a popularity poll.
Living Street's Aotearoa member Mike Mello has been advocating for the crossing for about 15 years. He says all types of traffic in the area have increased over that time, and foot and cycle traffic in particular over the last 2 years, since the waterfront was redeveloped. He says an overbridge would take longer and be more expensive, as well as less effective, because people won't be willing to climb the 7 metres in height to get across.
The bridge would have to be about 7 metres high. That's 2 stories. So if you're going to cross the road, you'd have to climb that number of steps or that length of ramp. That's a ramp that's 100 metres long. So you'd have to go 100 metres this side and 100 metres that side, and it would probably be out of your way to do it, and people wouldn't.
Mr. Mello says the crossing will have minimal disruptions, as it will have technology to scan traffic for gaps. However, Enterprise Miramar chairperson Thomas Wutzler says the street-level crossing will be more hazardous for pedestrians and cyclists than an overbridge. The Business Association is supporting the airport's stance. Mr. Wutzler says the crossing is not sensible as people are more likely to jaywalk.
Also for the congested short span, so people stop starting on a relatively main road is not conducive to what's already problematic with traffic flows.
Transporting NZ boss Nick Leggett says the crossing will not only impact the supply chain but will also impact the environment. He says slowing down trucks moving through the area will impact the economy and that the assumptions that it will be a greener option are incorrect.
But actually, when you slow down 35,000 vehicles a day, and then many of them will be forced to stop at the crossing, and then they have to accelerate again, you actually increase emissions.
Mr. Leggett says the road is a state highway and should be treated as such. Wellington Airport says alternative solutions to the crossing haven't been properly considered and believes a full review and genuine consultation are needed.
And if you were listening to that story on radio, don't forget to check out the video. We'll chuck it up on our webpage. Some of you getting in touch about the cost of living, and from your point of view, it ain't good news. Mo says taking GST off fruit and vegetables would be a good start in reducing food prices, surely. And this one, it is definitely a crisis, Lisa. I live in an affluent Auckland suburb, own a house and have a good income. The fixed costs in a weekly budget have gone up so much, it's hard to imagine how people in a worse situation than me can afford to live in New Zealand. And Alison says costs have definitely increased, but having tax cuts which give more to the wealthy is not the solution. Kia ora e te iwi e Hauriaki nei e checkpoint. We head northwest of Sydney where the Hawkesbury River is threatening businesses and the big wet that's not letting up. And we also talk to a bunch of MPs about the cost of living. It is a bird, bat, or no, it's just a flying tomato saucer. We check in on a grocery drone delivery trial. Homai or whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program, especially to hear from you about the cost of living in your part of the motu. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Ko iwi anō tēnei.
The Health Ministry says the Omicron outbreak may have peaked in Tamaki Makaurau. 8,500 of today's 22,500 new infections are in Auckland, and over the past week, the region's proportion of cases has fallen. Businesses are welcoming the news that people can return to work sooner after catching COVID. From Saturday, positive cases and the people they live with will have to isolate for 7 days, down from 10. Once people recover, they won't need to isolate as a household contact for the following 3 months. The Employers and Manufacturers Association says it will help firms struggling with staff shortages. The Mayor of Thames Coromandel, who refused a Pfizer vaccine and said she was waiting for Novavax, now says she won't be vaccinated with it. Sandra Gowdy says having considered the idea for a year, she's decided against it. A shipment of 250,000 Novavax COVID-19 vaccine doses arrived today, and a limited number of vaccination centres will be offering it from next week. Further evidence of human remains has been found in the Pike River mine. Pathologists have confirmed that images from a camera lowered down a re-drilled borehole show another 2 sets of remains, making 8 sets in all. The images are from an area where 3 men were believed to be working at the time of the first explosion in November 2010. The government will tomorrow confirm its plans for RNZ, TVNZ and the creation of a new public media entity. It's understood the 2 organisations will be disestablished and merged as one with a public service mandate. And a mayor from the Independent Working Group reviewing the government's 3 Waters proposal says councils will still have a big say in their water. The government wants to centralise water provision under 4 large entities rather than have councils do it individually. Hutt City's Campbell Barry says the group is recommending that councils be shareholders in the new entities. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Thanks, Evie. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa inainei. Ko Nicholas Poynton. Nicholas, the Commerce Commission's, study into building supplies. What are the expectations around that, given what we heard on the grocery study?
Well, I think, we spoke to an Auckland University professor today who says we probably shouldn't expect the shake-up. We probably shouldn't be expecting a major shake-up given what we saw with the grocery report. Obviously the response to the findings of that report were less than lukewarm from critics who were hoping that we're going to see some radical change in the sector given the dominance by the big two supermarket operators. But Richard Mead from AUT said the Commission's recommendations for the grocery sector, obviously they might not be what some consumers wanted, but they were measured and sensible, he says. He says those hoping for big changes in the building sector have to remember New Zealand's small population, meaning that business sustainability would be harder. He says that what we've seen from the previous two studies, it also takes into the one we saw into fuel prices, is that there is a degree of pragmatism on the Commerce Commission's part. He says it's unlikely that New Zealand will get the same sort of industry structure that we see in other countries which are much bigger. So he says we may not get the gains we hope for in studies like this, but the hope is that we'll get incremental developments over time that will deliver better outcomes for consumers.
And Nicholas, the US President Joe Biden is banning oil from Russia. So what's that doing to the price?
Well, yeah, that was the big news we saw in oil markets this morning, that it was part of the broad-based suite of economic sanctions we've seen placed on Russia. Look, it did see oil prices sort of eclipse $130 a barrel, but they probably weren't as high as many people may have expected. That's because investors have largely been factoring in that a ban like this was going to be pretty likely. I guess, an omission from the announcement was that the EU hasn't signed up to this suite of ban. They have to this ban on Russian oil and gas, given that so many countries in the European Union depend on Russia for its gas reserves to essentially power their economies. But we heard from the head of global commodity research at the Bank of America, Francisco Blanch, who says that prices will continue to go up. He says that $150 a barrel, that may seem bad, but we could see things get as ugly as $200 a barrel for oil. And that's going to be a lot of pain felt by people around the world. And his warning is that it's quite possible that Western countries will hurt their own economies more than Russia with the implementation of these sanctions. And like a couple of days ago, I think this is worth mentioning that RNZ spoke to the European Institute at Columbia University, Professor Adam Tooze, who said that we should use Iran as an example for sanctions. We saw very harsh sanctions placed on that country following the development of its nuclear program, harsher than what we saw in Russia, yet the country's economy still functions pretty well. That's because it was able to adjust by selling its resources to other players. There were takers for it. And the point he makes is that Russia is a lot stronger economy going into this war, now having these sanctions placed on them. So, look, we can't say with any certainty if these sanctions that we're placing on Russia will actually have the desired effect.
And Nicholas, should we take a trot around the markets?
Yeah, the NZX trimmed its losses up 40 points to 11,785. The dollar trading at 68.1 US cents, 93.7 Australian. Brent crude oil is at $131 a barrel. And finally, I thought I should mention gold. Like all commodity prices, it's near a record high at $2,057 an ounce.
Thanks, Nicholas. Ka kite. Nicholas Poynton there with Business News. A Labour MP's broken ranks with the Prime Minister, describing the cost of living as an inequity crisis. Earlier this week, Jacinda Ardern says she wouldn't call it a crisis, but Te Piramia acknowledged there's undeniably an impact that people are feeling. Checkpoint has had a flood of feedback on the cost of petrol and other everyday essentials like groceries and rent. So we decided to call a few MPs of all stripes to see if they reckon it's a crisis and ask what their bright ideas are to make it better.
Kia ora, Tamati speaking.
Kia ora, Tamati. It's Lisa Owen calling from RNZ's Checkpoint program. How are you?
Hey, Lisa, I'm good. And question time, as you'll appreciate, starts in about a minute.
Okay, can you spare me 1 minute then, please, to talk about the cost of living? Okay, you're being recorded. How would you describe the cost of living in New Zealand? Is it a crisis?
The fact that I noticed when I went to last fill up my petrol tank and last went supermarket shopping, I'd say that we were in really, really tough times. I wouldn't say it's happened overnight. This has been a crisis. I'd also say it's a bit of an inequity crisis that's going on as well between those that have and those that don't.
So it's pretty serious, a crisis in your view?
It's a pretty serious thing.
ACT MP Karen Shaw is next.
Hello, Karen speaking.
Kia ora, Karen. It's Lisa Owen. How would you describe the cost of living in New Zealand right now?
Working class are getting poorer and struggling. The ones that were surviving are now not surviving. You know, when you're looking at the added pressure of $4,000 to $5,000 a year, an extra cost just on basics like food, rent and gas, it's not looking good.
The Prime Minister says she wouldn't describe it as a crisis. Would you?
Yeah, I really think at the moment people are seeing it as a crisis when they're having to choose between, you know, feeding their children or putting petrol in the car. I think that shows we're at crisis point.
Dialling to Pāti Māori MP, Debbie Ngāri-Wapaka.
Poverty and hardship has become worse as the cost of living through COVID has become higher. So I know some people are debating if there's a crisis. For a lot of our community, there was a crisis pre-COVID and it has only gotten tougher.
Calling Green MP Ricardo Menendez-March.
Kia ora, Lisa, just 1 second. Running to my office again. I mean, the cost of living in New Zealand is far too high and it's a result of an inequality crisis that has been brewing for some years now.
Ko Karen Shaw anō tēnei. Here's Karen Shaw again. Price of 91 petrol a litre, how much is it?
It's around near the $3 mark at the moment, depending on where you are.
What about a head of broccoli?
Oh, that's not something I've brought in a while, so I wouldn't be able to tell you the price of that, sorry.
Not fond of broccoli then, Karen?
Yeah, no, my children actually love broccoli. I just haven't had a chance to be making stir-fries lately.
Labour List MP Tamati Coffee again. How in touch are you with people's everyday realities, do you think?
Oh. Are you about to ask me the price of butter or the price of cauliflower?
Stand by, Tamati. How much do you pay for a pound of butter? What does it cost? Roundabout.
It costs about $5.50.
Okay, what about a kilo of cheese? Just a home brand?
Home brand, about $14. I went down to the supermarket recently and I was quite shocked.
Inflation for the past year was what?
Oh, I can't tell you that off the top of my head.
Okay. Do you know how much more people are paying due to that inflation, an average household in a year?
I haven't got the numbers off the top of my head, Lisa.
Okay, between $3,000 and $5,000, according to some economists. What will the minimum wage be when the new rate hits in April?
See, I'm tethered to the living wage, and as a good small business employer, I've been on the living wage for quite some time. So it is $21.75, if I remember rightly.
Back to Debbie Ngāri-Wapaka. So if we were to give you a list, let's start with butter, a pound of butter. Do you know how much that would cost?
Oh, God, about $5 something.
$5.50. $5.50. What about broccoli, a head of broccoli? What do you reckon that would cost?
Oh, I don't know anybody that buys broccoli. It's too expensive, just like cauliflower. So, I mean, we tend to probably use our community gardens around here when we can. There hasn't been broccoli for a while, but tomatoes at the moment are $3 a bag down at the Patia gardens.
Come in, Ricardo Menendez-March. How much do you reckon you pay for a kilo of cheese these days? Just a basic home brand kilo of cheese. What does that cost?
I think it's about $12 if I'm not mistaken.
Let's go with something green, Ricardo. What about a head of broccoli? What do you think that would cost you?
I know the price has gone up quite a lot, but I think, again, I mean, I think what ultimately, that thing's been like $3.50 or so.
Bang on. What is your one idea, the one thing that you would like to be able to do to make it better? What policy, what thing, what have you got?
What I'd really like to do is to see what the Welfare Expert Advisory Group recommended in 2019, and that we were able to increase the low incomes and benefits to a livable rate, to be able to at least bring those who are the worst up.
The main thing we would do is provide tax relief, cutting the 30% tax rate down to 17.5%. That would give the average worker an extra $2,000 in their pocket, and they can decide what they want to do with it.
Rent controls need to be on the agenda. Rents continue to be part of one of the biggest costs of living for people, but as well, one of the things that we have explored, particularly in response to the ComCom report on supermarket industry, is to explore setting up more stringent measures such as a state-owned competitor.
Tamati coffee again. If you believe that there is a current crisis around the cost of living, what is the one thing that you would push for to make it better?
Oh, look, I know that it was a Labor Party policy quite a few elections ago, but actually taking the GST off fruit and vegetables is something that's been raised with me locally amongst my local Labor members. So it's something that I wouldn't mind seeing us have another go at.
Going to have a talk to your leader about that?
I'll have a talk to more than just the leader, to quite a few people actually that I engage with.
Now, we also called National MP Maureen Pugh, but she didn't want to speak to Checkpoint and referred us to the National Party press team. You would have heard Tamati Coffee there talking about the living wage. He put it at $21.75. It's actually $22.75. And if you're wondering about the cost of the items we were looking at, Checkpoint looked online at the cheapest plain home brands that were available to purchase via online delivery. And we're getting lots of feedback from you on the cost of living. Donna says it's absolutely a crisis in cost rises for all Kiwis. Supermarkets making $1 million a day is a clear evidence of price gouging and the two grocery giants exploiting all shoppers. Another listener says the cost of living is affecting me. Rice and frozen veg for dinner every day, but there is a pandemic and a war. Price rises are to be expected. Another bit of feedback is the reckons of the pro-EV crowd always come across as a little condescending. I would love an EV, but for an apartment dweller, it isn't feasible, nor is it feasible for many young people flatting or for families who lack parking on their properties. And this person says, I went to get cheese last night and it's like $18 for a kilo. We are far from the land of the plenty. Shocking state we are in, too many excuses. The reality is to do something like, why not take GST off food? Something needs to happen. Our basic costs, food and petrol, are unsustainable. It is 5:45. Adoption practices have come under the scrutiny of the Abuse and Care Royal Commission today. The Commission's holding a special hearing into the experiences of Māori in state and faith-based care. It heard from Māori who say there was little vetting by the state, with the Adoption Act used as a tool of assimilation. Māori News reporter Jamie Tahana is following the hearing.
This woman, who was identified only as Ms. AF, was adopted out by her teen mother at only a few months old. In the 1960s, she told the Royal Commission, it was a process steeped in racism.
If they wanted to make sure you're adopted and you were born light-skinned, you were classed as white. So they changed my birth certificate to Caucasian and changed my birth mother to Caucasian, so that then I was deemed legally white and could be adopted more easily.
Ms. AF said her birth father's whānau had tried to adopt her, whāngai, but the authorities prevented this. She said it was a blatant attempt at assimilation. Instead, she was shipped off to an adoptive family who were the source of years of torment. They weren't vetted at all.
There was no process. They got the letter from the priest. They got other letters from leaders in that community, and they were white. So they were the perfect family, according to our state.
It was a similar story for Ms. A.E., who also appeared before the Commission today. She too was adopted out as a child to a couple who gave little care.
Basically, I was adopted to work on their farm. I don't believe I was ever considered a child. I can remember trying so very hard to please and meet approval, but that never worked.
The Royal Commission is holding a special hearing into Māori experiences in state and faith-based care. So far this week, it's heard of violence at state-run institutions and by foster parents employed by the state. But today's witnesses were adoptees and were never checked on by officials. They were both physically and sexually abused. They were both neglected, made to feel worthless. Ms. AE and Ms. AF say their abuse came because the Adoption Act sought to assimilate. Whānau were never considered, they say. Instead, they were placed into homes of cruelty.
I remember when I told my mum my Māori name that was gifted to me by a kuia, that why would I want to be that? You know, when they're nothing but dirty savages, they're dirty people. And she couldn't understand why I would want to be Māori. I'm white enough, I look white enough, why would I want to be that way?
They've endured years of trauma from the abuse, which they say has set them back in life. Ms. AE says the lack of identity is a pain that holds deep.
Well, being Māori and always, that's the first thing you get asked, where are you from? And not being able to answer those questions wholly, I suppose, has always been a particular mamai.
But she's gone on to big things and has her own whānau. And through great effort, she managed to track down her birth parents and find her whakapapa.
Some say love, it is a razor that leaves.
Ms. AF too has always sought to prove the world wrong. Reading through her adoption notes, she discovered an official had written her off as a baby. The notes read, quote, imbecile and an idiot. She's got a PhD now. She asked to sing a waiata to the Royal Commission.
Is a flower, and you.
And it rang out through the wharenui at Orake Marae.
It is 10 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now to the clean-up from devastating floods in northern New South Wales. Prime Minister Scott Morrison has declared a national state of emergency. Mr Morrison is visiting the region today as thousands of residents continue the long journey to recovery. The scale of the crisis just keeps growing, with anger now mounting about the response to animals stranded and suffering across the region. The ABC's Stephanie Smale reports.
As the human crisis unfolded in the floodwaters of northern New South Wales, animals were caught too. In the aftermath, local vet Bruno Ross says he and other vets in the region spent days trying to reach animals still stranded, injured and starving. He's angry at authorities who he says were slow to respond.
I've got images that are blatant animal cruelty through a slow and pathetic government response. They have not provided the resources they could have got hold of, and animals have been left stranded, starving, when they should have been fed earlier. I suspect animals that could have been saved by simply having hay dropped to them have died. Animals that should have been euthanased sooner have been missed.
Bruno Ross says he has tried for more than a week to contact authorities to help them find stranded animals and coordinate food drops, with no response. The New South Wales Agriculture Minister Dugald Saunders concedes the loss of animal life has been huge, but he argues authorities have done everything they can to reach isolated animals.
Since literally Thursday, when we're able to have choppers in the air safely and start delivering fodder, that's been happening. There have been numerous surveillance flights to actually check for animals that may have been stranded and needed fodder where people weren't quite sure where they were. The amount of fodder that's now been distributed is over 1.5 million kilograms.
Are you concerned that there are still animals that are stranded and suffering in the area?
Oh, look, that's quite possible. And to be completely honest, one would expect that will continue. But it's not animal cruelty. It's what happens in a flood is we've seen entire herds of cattle swept down rivers. We've seen entire herds swept out to sea and then arriving back in beaches. We've seen cattle on rooftops. We've seen horses on balconies. It's not normal behaviour. It's not normal expectations. What it is an absolute natural disaster beyond anything we've ever seen before.
And ever been up to your elbows in scone or biscuit mix and discovered a vital ingredient missing and wished you could magic it up? Well, a supermarket chain in Australia just might have the solution. They're trialling home deliveries by drone. Coles Supermarket, one of the two biggest grocery chains across the ditch, has just launched the trial in Canberra. Meg Rayner from Coles joins us now. Meg, how does this work? Because I don't imagine you can stick half a side of beef on a drone delivery.
No, I think the day we see trolleys floating through the skies would be worrying for everyone. No, this is more of a top-up service, exactly as you just described. So we've partnered with Wing to arrange for drone delivery for about 250 different products that can be, flown straight into your backyard.
So what sort of things are we talking about in terms of size and weight?
So we've got about 1 kilo of weight, and obviously the little carton that they carry in is quite small as well. So we're looking at our most popular products are fruit, a lot of bananas and berries. We're seeing pantry top-ups, sandwiches, all the sort of convenience meals that people might want to get delivered for their lunch or afternoon tea, or potentially things for the following morning for breakfast or lunch for school lunches and stuff.
So did you survey customers ahead of time? Because supermarkets have thousands of products that would be in that weight size category.
Well, I mean, we've been doing things like Uber and DoorDash and last mile delivery services to homes for a while. So we know what the sorts of products are that people forget when they go and do their full grocery shop or their trolley shop, because this isn't designed to replace that. This is sort of, as I said, a top-up. So we know the sorts of things that people are more likely to buy. And because it is a pilot program, we can always take things off, add things, see what works and play with that offer.
I am looking, as we're talking, at some video footage of the drone setup. I have to say, it does kind of give me the heebies. I mean, how safe is it? Is there any concerns? I mean, do you fly over people's houses? What are the regulations that you're having to comply with to make sure there's no oopsies?
So this is why we partner with experts. So at Coles, like most grocery supermarkets, we've been delivering to customers' houses by a van for years. In fact, at Coles, more than 20 years. We were one of the first, if not the first in Australia, to offer home delivery. So we're not the experts in drones. That's why we've partnered with Wing. And Wing has all the professionals, all the pilots who know how and when they can fly, how high they can fly, how close they can fly to things. And they've got all of the accreditation to make sure that they are meeting those regulations. Now, because it's currently offered in Canberra, we've got a small area where we're able to trial this. And if we were to expand, then we would obviously need to look at the different regulations in different states, because it's different depending on where you are. I'm sure it's different in New Zealand to what it is in Australia. So we just make sure that we comply with those to make sure that we're offering a convenient service.
Meg, I don't want to be a killjoy, but wouldn't a motorbike be just as effective?
Look, do you know what? There's a sustainability aspect to this. So having these sorts of things does take vehicles off the road. And at Coles, we are genuinely committed to becoming Australia's most sustainable supermarket. So we're going to try whatever it takes to try and get us there and also meet the growing customer demand for fast, convenient delivery. And this meets the brief, because the fastest delivery we've done was 3.5 minutes.
What was on board, Meg? Tomato sauce? Did you have chips?
I don't have that order. I should have had that to hand, but it was 3.5 minutes, so it must have been very close by.
So how's it going, and when will you know if it's worth going wider?
Sure. So it's been going for almost a month. We've seen quite a lot of customer demand. As I'm sure you guys know, we've also had quite a lot of bad weather in Australia recently, so that has hampered some of the flight times we're available to have them in the sky. But aside from that, in terms of customers looking through their app, having a look at what's available and then going through with their orders, we're definitely seeing increased growth on that and increased sales. So for us, what is success? It's a combination of customer demand, customer sales and feedback. We are constantly getting feedback from customers to find out what they want, what works, what doesn't work, and how we can meet the brief a bit better.
Good to talk to you, Meg. That's Meg Rayner from Coles there on the trial of using drones to deliver bits and pieces from the groceries that you may have forgotten. The severe sanctions imposed on Russia for its invasion of Ukraine are starting to take their toll. The economy is starting to collapse, and despite the risks taken by protesters, anti-war sentiment is being expressed across Russia. There is also a sense that the war is not going the way Russia planned. The BBC's Steve Rosenberg reports from Moscow.
Women's Day. It's one of Russians' favourite holidays, but this year's felt subdued and tense. Moscow police out in force to prevent protests at what Russia's doing in Ukraine. And from the Kremlin, a request for Russian women to support the offensive.
I want to say this to mothers, wives, sisters and girlfriends of our soldiers and officers in battle who are defending Russia in this special military operation. I understand how worried you must be about your loved ones. You should be proud of them, like the whole country is.
What the whole country isn't is fully behind the Kremlin's decision to send in the troops. This was St. Petersburg on Women's Day. The sign says, "Stop sending our soldiers to their deaths." Many Russians, though, do believe the Kremlin line, that this is not a war, but an operation to protect Russia. I ask Anna and Olga, how much do they support Putin? 100%. No, 200%, she says. He's doing the right thing. And that's what we've told our children. That is exactly what Vladimir Putin wants the public to think.
Let's get to some of your feedback before the news at 6, and there's lots of it, pretty much all on the cost of living. Fen says it now costs at least $100 to $200 more a week to get by. The government must, in capital letters, remove GST from food and then introduce a capital gains tax to recoup the loss. Leah says, I usually spend $200 a week, including cleaning, etc. products. The quantity I used to get has reduced. I'm getting less for the same amount of dollars. I just do without. We became a society of things and spending, says Leah. Butter is $8 a 500 gram block in Russell, this person says. A reminder, we were looking for the cheapest options we could get on click and collect or similar. $6 for a loaf of Vogels in Northland, this listener says too. Countdown has all the butter for $6.50. Another person says they were listening while walking through the supermarket and they reckon that those blocks of butter are marked at a special price too.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. The COVID-19 response minister says some positive community cases will be missed under the change in isolation rules, but it's a necessary risk if the country's supply chains are to stay afloat. From Saturday, people who test positive and those they live with will have to self-isolate for 7 days, not 10. Chris Hipkins told Checkpoint the cost of keeping people in isolation longer was outweighing the benefits.
Well, if you look at the evidence from around the world, it varies significantly, and it varies based on a whole range of factors, including vaccination rates and so on, but it could be anything from 5% to up to 20%, but more likely it's at the lower end of that spectrum.
Chris Hipkins says most COVID-19 infection is picked up in the first 7 days of self-isolation. However, the Green Party is worried about the reduced isolation period for COVID cases and household contacts. Co-leader Marama Davidson says she understands why it could be helpful to reduce the isolation period.
Including for people and families who are struggling and need that connection. But supporting people to stay home while they are sick is one of the priority public health long-term responses that we can have right now.
The rising cost of living is taking its toll on families in Kaikohe, where there's little escape from higher petrol prices and expensive groceries. The Northland town has limited bus services, and many residents say e-vehicles aren't appropriate for the region's roads. Local man Timmy, who runs a sausage sizzle on the main road, says he's seeing the struggle.
Well, I try and give sausages away, right? Because people can't even afford a $2 sausage. And even though bread's gone up, it used to be $1, it's gone up to $1.40, right? And the sausages have gone up. I know there's a lot of people around Kaikohe who struggle. So.
The Prime Minister says New Zealand won't be immune to rising energy and fuel prices as a result of the Ukraine crisis. The US has confirmed a complete ban on Russian oil, gas and coal imports, and oil prices are already surging. Jacinda Ardern says all the sanctions against Russia are necessary, but there will be a knock-on effect. She says the economic recovery from COVID, together with supply constraints and the war in Ukraine, is creating a perfect storm that everyone is experiencing. The government will tomorrow confirm its plans for RNZ, TVNZ and the creation of a new public media entity. It's understood the two organisations will be disestablished and reformed as one with a public service mandate. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Labour's plan's been a long time in the making, but an announcement about the new public media entity is finally imminent. There will, however, be a lengthy transition period during which the current operations of both TVNZ and RNZ will continue. It's understood the new entity will be able to raise some revenue through commercial operations, but commercial-free aspects, particularly for RNZ, will be protected. This year, an establishment board will be created, and once legislation's been passed and a charter drafted, the new entity is expected to be in place by mid-next year.
Polls have opened in South Korea's presidential election after a tightly contested race dominated by smear campaigns by the two main candidates. The race is between the governing Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung and his conservative rival Yoon Song-yeol of the People Power Party. The BBC's Laura Becker is at a polling station in Seoul.
What we have are two candidates who are poles apart, but neck and neck when it comes to this presidential campaign. Lee Jae-myung is the leading Liberal Party candidate, and he has got this domestic issue with regards to apartment prices. He says he's going to build affordable housing. But on the other side, you have Yoon, who's from the Conservative side, who's saying, well, hang on a second, I will also help you with apartment prices, and I will get rid of all the policies of Moon Jae-in.
Protesters who have been occupying a central Christchurch park appear to be sticking to their word and packing up their illegal camp. The City Council yesterday asked the 50 to 70 people camped in Cranmer Square to leave by tonight, and this afternoon it said many had already left. And tents, camping gear and other property left behind by protesters around Parliament have been destroyed because they were a health hazard. The police say the gear taken from Molesworth and Hill Streets and some nearby private properties was found to be contaminated with human waste, dirt and hay. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the show must go on, and in these Omicron times that means going online. I speak to Helena Pohl, Artistic Director of Nelson's Adam Chamber Music Festival. I'm performing live from a safe distance. Our Wind on the World asks, how high can an insect fly? And Lewis Griffiths talks about his great uncle and his survival story aboard the HMS New Zealand during the First World War on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And you'll find more news on our website at rnz.co.nz. You're back with Elisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Mainly fine. Isolated showers, especially north of Orewa and about Coromandel Peninsula. For the remainder of Te Ika Maui, mostly fine. Low cloud for Wellington tomorrow morning. Isolated showers about some central ranges until tonight. For Te Waipoinamu, Nelson, Buller and Westland mainly fine. Cloudy periods tomorrow with occasional showers south of the glaciers. Fiordland, occasional rain clearing by this evening, but there are showers tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, North Otago, Central Otago and Dunedin mainly fine today. Isolated afternoon showers inland. Low cloud and patchy drizzle is developing tonight. Drizzle is clearing tomorrow morning and low cloud will retreat to the coast until the evening. Clutha and Southland, cloudy periods today with light rain about Rakiura, Stewart Island, clearing this evening. Areas of low cloud tomorrow morning, otherwise fine. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy. It's 6 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora e ho, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The government has slashed the isolation requirements for COVID cases by almost a third as the rapacious spread of Omicron threatens to grind businesses to a halt. More than 22,000 new cases were reported in the community today and sadly another 4 deaths. Hospitalisations are steady at about 740. 19 people are in intensive care. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Cam Doidge is on day 10 of self-isolation, 10 days trapped in his Wellington flat, locked away from the world.
It's been a long 10 days, and I'm just glad there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
His mini-lockdown began after one of his flatmates tested positive for COVID-19. So far, he has avoided the same fate.
We made him eat in his room, kind of just shut him away, which is a bit sad. So I think he's going to be the happiest to get out.
Soon, that sentence will be a little bit shorter. The government is cutting the self-isolation period by almost a third, down from 10 days to 7, beginning Saturday. That's both for people who've contracted COVID-19 and those they live with. Household contacts will need a test on day 3 and 7. Once a person has recovered from the virus, they're in the clear for the next 3 months. They'll have to isolate only if they're reinfected, not if a household member is. The COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins, says the move is in line with the health advice and international evidence.
There is a balance here between making sure that we are continuing to keep the country functioning whilst also doing everything that we can to reasonably turn down the level of risk that we're seeing.
Many businesses have been struggling with staff shortages as COVID cases explode and more people have been confined to their homes. Transport and food supplies have come under pressure and many stores have had to temporarily close or reduce hours. Alan McDonald from the Employers and Manufacturers Association says today's announcement will help ease the burden.
Being able to get people back to work quicker will help keep up. I mean, we've seen some of our members with 50% absentee rates. 20, 30, 50 are the sort of numbers we're hearing. And it's causing all sorts of random closures.
Professor Michael Baker from the University of Otago is comfortable with the move, saying 7 days will still break the vast majority of transmissions.
One of the safeguards here, of course, is that if at 7 days you still have symptoms, you continue to isolate until 24 hours after symptoms have finished. So that will help in managing that slight risk.
Indeed, Professor Baker sees room to reduce the self-isolation time again, depending on how today's move goes.
Potentially shortening the period with a test at the end of 5 days might be an alternative.
The ACT Party wants to go even further and right away. David Seymour points to the Singaporean model, 72 hours and then out after a negative test.
The government actually needs to apologise for the excessive and unworkable isolation rules that have decimated business to date.
But there's little support in Parliament for such a significant shift, even from ACT's opposition partner, National. Deputy Nicola Willis says the week-long limit is right. It's just taken too long to get here.
We have been calling for this change for a number of weeks, and it's a shame it's only happening now.
Opposition parties tend to call for everything now, right now. As soon as they have an idea, they want to know why it hasn't immediately been done. Things do take a little bit of time.
A little bit too long for Cam Doidge, ready to re-emerge into the world tomorrow.
If it was announced last Friday, that would have been great, but hey, it is what it is.
First thing on his to-do list, visit his partner and give her a hug.
President Biden has banned Russian oil and other energy imports to the United States, piling pressure on Vladimir Putin to halt the assault on Ukraine. More global brands have also stopped sales in Russia, including McDonald's, Starbucks, Coca-Cola, Shell, Ford and Nike. Temporary humanitarian corridors have provided safe passage for some civilians in besieged Ukrainian towns and cities, yet others remain trapped amid heavy Russian shelling. The United Nations now says more than 2 million people have fled Ukraine. The BBC's Jeremy Bowen reports from near the city Kiev.
Not many days might be left for civilians escaping the fighting northwest of Kyiv. On the way out of Irpin towards the capital and along this section of the front, there were signs that a bigger battle is coming. Since the war started, they've been treating the wounded at a hospital about 2 miles from the Russian positions. These are the men whose resistance blunted their initial offensive. I've still got 2 legs, he said. They'll fix me up, and I'll fight on. The hospital director said this was the Third World War.
The Russian people understand only the language of the power, nothing more. It is impossible to negotiate with the men who came to kill you.
By this morning, they were getting ready to abandon the hospital. The director said, "My ship is sinking, and I'll be the last to leave." You have the strong feeling here that they're preparing for the worst. Packing up the medical equipment, the patients have been evacuated, the Russians are not very far away. There's a tangible fear in this place that Russian offensive, which has been stalled, may be ready to regain momentum and start moving closer to the capital. But around here, the Ukrainians are still holding the Russians. A few traces of old lives are left, where families cook their food, and the dogs waiting for owners who may never return. It was a lonely and tense drive back to Kyiv. Ukrainian troops are dug into the woods, waiting. We gave a lift to a couple who'd left their frontline village after 13 days and nights in a shelter. It used to be such a lovely place, she said. Now there's no house, no street, and no village. Ukrainian soldiers were strengthening a blocking position at a strategic crossroads. Dragan, their commander, issuing a stream of orders, radiated urgency. They weren't wasting any time. You could see the pressure. We're here to destroy the enemy brigades, he said, the occupiers who've come to our country and are heading our way. Back in Kyiv, the checkpoints are looking more like barricades. They're using the days to prepare for whatever's next. Civilians are turning out for weapons training. Lesson over? The guns are returned. These are not would-be frontline soldiers, at least not yet.
I believe that during these times we just learn to be ready. That is what I think. We just learn because we can be scary after that when it is ending, but right now we just need to do our job and what we can right now.
Everyone I've met here says they're ready to resist. The Russians so far have moved slowly. The capital's respite might not last much longer.
It is 6:15 and you're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. The Australian Prime Minister has declared a state of emergency in response to the catastrophic floods on the east coast. The declaration gives the federal government power to deploy money and resources faster. Just out of COVID isolation, Scott Morrison travelled to the town of Lismore, where he was greeted by angry locals whose lives have been turned upside down by the floodwaters. Meanwhile, the misery continues in the area with more rain and flooding along the mighty Hawkesbury River northwest of Sydney. Residents and businesses have been inundated and the emergency is not yet over. The river runs for 120 kilometres and the banks started breaking late last week, turning normally peaceful rural areas into a vast muddy inland sea. Raylene Hoskins is part of a family go-karting business that's been operating near the river for 4 generations. And Raylene joins me now. Hi Raylene, what's been happening at your place?
A lot of rain. Yeah, it's been absolutely crazy. The low fronts that just kept coming and the rain just did not stop. Yeah. So, yeah. And then, just flooding. So, yeah, it's just been a bit crazy this last week.
Your family has been there for 4 generations. Has anyone experienced anything like this before?
Yeah, the family, my husband's business, and his family have been on the property since early 70s. So they have seen a few. They've only seen one or, two, 3 that have been a good size. But, yeah, after last year, we had a small one in 2020. So it was like the start of a 3-year flood thing. And that was February. And then last year was March. They just kept predicting that was getting higher each time. So... And then, yeah, this one was a little bit bigger than what we wanted. So, yeah, just a bit crazy. So, yeah.
Raylene, that's got to take its toll, one after the other, after the next.
Yeah. Business is definitely struggling, especially, prior to that, we're very close to the bushfires as well. So, just a small suffer there and then a small flood, then COVID lockdown. And obviously we're a recreational park and, water skiing and go-karting is not deemed, essential. So that was locked down for a few weeks and months. Then again last year and then lockdown for I think 16 weeks last year for COVID. So, yeah, just been crazy, absolutely crazy.
Raylene, I've been looking at some pictures of your go-kart track. Pristine, beautiful lawns, well-maintained tracks, and some aerial shots, of the operation. Looks amazing. What does it look like now?
Completely underwater, the whole lot. I think we can see just the tip of the roof. And that's about it. And it's up to the gutters of the control tower we have there as well. So, everything's underwater.
So how high would that control tower be, do you reckon?
From the ground, it's, it probably stands a good 5 metres, yeah. So, it's definitely up to the gutters there. My husband and his brother were just over there before, just checking what was happening and tying down anything that we thought might float away. So, it's pretty high, definitely high.
Is it over yet? Is there yet more to come?
They're saying it peaked today. Winds are peaked, so it's peaked at different areas along the river from North Richmond down to Windsor. Windsor's closest to us. So we have seen, probably since just before lunch, starting to drop now. It's slowly dropping, but that's a bonus. And the sun has been out, which has been brilliant.
So how long before you reckon you can get stuck in and start cleaning up? And is it fixable?
The problem is, obviously with the surface, it's an asphalt surface on the go-kart track. So when you have a lot of water over it for a long time, like any road, they do get air bubbles underneath it. So we have to wait until that's definitely off there before we can see what damage has actually been done. Look, most of the infrastructure we've got on there is nearly built for flooding. So everything gets ripped out so then we can get back in there and clean it. It did come up the other day. It slowly went down because we have 27 acres and one half of the business is a water skiing and we have a kiosk. So we actually cleaned that on Saturday and was quite excited that we were getting back into it again. And then the river just kept coming and kept coming. Yeah, it was a pretty sleepless night last night. So I dare say it's going to be another couple of days till we can start seeing what we can do.
Have you had help from the local authorities and did you have enough warning?
Yeah, definitely warning this time. Being in a family that's been on the river, you can't live and have a business on the river and not expect it to flood. So my husband is quite competent in reading all the river heights and from upstream to downstream and where the rain's been coming. We absolutely, through New South Wales, we got absolutely pumped with water all the way from Queensland. So we were monitoring it anyway. So we did start to evacuate a lot of non-essential things that we didn't need from Tuesday, and then from Wednesday it just, full on. So, yeah.
Raylene, before you head off, have you still got a roof over your head, your house? How's that?
The house, the water was coming up last night, but definitely we have power here and we have a roof over our head. So we have dogs at work, so I've actually got them at home with all mine. So a little bit chaotic, but we're all a bit resilient over here, so you just kind of have to get on with it.
Raylene, we wish you all the best and thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
No problems. Thank you so much.
That's Raylene Hodgkin, who's got a go-karting business, family business there, absolutely swamped in that torrential flooding. In Florida, the state Senate has passed a controversial bill that would limit conversations about sexual orientation and gender identity in classrooms or kindergarten and primary age children. It's officially named the Parental Rights and Educational Bill, but is unofficially called the Don't Say Gay Bill by its opponents. CNN's Leila Santiago reports.
Despite the statewide protests,
show the Florida legislature that what they are doing does not represent us.
The emotional pleas.
I never knew that living my truth would cause church members to leave my dad's church or friends to stop talking to me.
22 yeas, 17 nays, Mr. President.
So the bill passes.
Florida's Senate today passed Bill 1557, a bill that essentially bars teachers from discussing sexual orientation and gender identity in the classrooms of young students. The bill calls for procedures to reinforce the fundamental right of parents and prohibits instructions on sexual orientation or gender identity in K through third grade in a manner that is not age appropriate, but doesn't define what that means.
And we're going to make sure that parents are able to send their kid to kindergarten without having some of this stuff injected into their school curriculum.
There is no curriculum for K through third grade. And so if that's in sex education, so if that's the case, then what are we doing right now? Why is this even necessary?
Florida Democratic and openly gay Senator Chevron Jones argued the bill is a political move that is hurtful to the LGBTQ community. Critics refer to it as the Don't Say Gay bill, even though the bill does not specifically prohibit the use of the word gay. The spokesperson for Governor Ron DeSantis, however, on her personal Twitter account, has called it something very different, the anti-grooming bill. Grooming, a predatory practice used by sex offenders to gain trust and seduce children, which is not in the bill either.
There is an assertion that LGBTQ people simply by existing are a threat to children. That is bigotry. It's at the core of this bill.
The bill now heads to the desk of Governor Ron DeSantis, who is expected to sign it into law.
I think it's inappropriate to be injecting those matters like a transgenderism into a kindergarten classroom.
And to those who think you can legislate gay people away, I'm sorry. You cannot.
The city of Kharkiv in northeastern Ukraine has been one of the primary targets of the Russian offensive. From the first days of the invasion, shells have rained down on the city centre and residential neighbourhoods alike. Alex is a local musician who's been taking shelter in his basement recording studio with members of his band, Salo Iludi, and they've been live streaming performances on YouTube. Alex sent this audio diary to the BBC.
My war started here. So this is the place where missile hit 3 days ago, and the blast wave destroyed my house. We have a basement which is 160 square meters, and it's become a shelter for a bunch of people, actually. Well, I'm glad that we can bring them safety. My friends with a little child and his grandmother now, and I think more people coming. This was going to be, and still is going to be, the sound director's room. Now it's kitchen. If we will be able to buy some benzene tomorrow, we'll be doing the Molotov cocktails. Seventh day of the war, still safe, still alive. Now we're closer to acceptance. Almost all of us went through denial, through all of those stages, so trying to cheer up each other. The last 2 days our city was massively bombed with airstrikes, lots of destructions, many casualties. All of us are frightened enough to not underestimate the danger. We all realize that if NATO gets involved, we could find ourselves, find the world within the Third World War. But in my opinion, we're already there. So anyway, staying strong, never giving up, never surrender, because we're actually tired of living in constant terror.
And you can find more of Alex and his band on YouTube. Now, it's 3 words, SELO, then a gap, I, then LUDY. Finally tonight, what goes up must come down, or does it? One Indiana teenager found out the hard way that it can take some time to rescue a cat from a tree when he tried and got stuck himself. And whilst the fire brigade eventually got the teenager down, the cat was left in the tree. CNN's Jenny Moose reports on the catastrophe.
This is a story of a teenager who went out on a limb.
Owen, you are my hero.
To try and rescue Kaylee Murphy's cat up a tree in an Indianapolis park, but then the would-be rescuer himself needed rescuing. The Indianapolis Fire Department spent 2 hours rigging up ropes and harnesses on a windy day, telling the 17-year-old to hold on tight. 3-year-old Appa the cat watched from a branch just a few feet above as the rescue of his rescuer came to a head.
You're good, Owen. We got you, bud.
Watching Owen get lowered raises the question,
Hi.
why are felines always getting stuck? When it comes to cats, what goes up doesn't necessarily like to come down. Cats are built in a way that makes them good climbers, with strong hind legs to push and curved claws that grip and pull. But this means they have to descend backwards.
Oh, good boy.
And Appa wasn't descending, so once Owen was safely down, Kaylee asked the firefighters to rescue her cat.
And just told us no, packed up and left. Sorry, it was just so upsetting.
Though it is common policy for fire departments not to rescue cats. Indianapolis FD told us we were not going to put a rescuer in harm's way to save a cat in a tree. Kaylee ended up calling a professional tree service. 8 hours later at 1:30 in the morning, amid lightning and rain, an arborist in a bucket truck brought the cat down. The rescue of the teen was the cat's meow, while the rescue of the cat led to some pussyfooting around.
Yay, kitty cat rescued. The last word to you on the price of living here. On Twitter, Jan says if GST is removed from fruit and vegetables, the prices won't go down. Supermarkets will simply absorb the GST amount into their profits. Another person says, yes, prices are crazy at the moment, but broccoli's always expensive when it's out of season. Now, the Late News team will keep you updated throughout the night. If you missed anything from the program, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a Pōpō, and tomorrow from 5 a.m. First Up looks at whether we can change our travel behaviour to save money on petrol. Kei te hoki mai anō a Pōpō whānau pō Māori. Catch you tomorrow.